Hello there, this is Rom Wills coming back at you with yet another video. Know the women in your environment. And before I go further, this week I'm going to talk about basics, 3 of the basics in getting women. 3 of the 4 pillars that Master Teacher BGS had laid out as far as getting women. 3 of the 4. I'm not, just to be clear, I talk about sex all the time. So that should be apparent, hopefully. But I want to talk about 3 of the other pillars he talked about. And one of them, of course, is your environment. How are the women behaving in your environment? That's one of the things, because different guys gonna have different environments. Some guys gonna be in environments where, you know, it might be a bunch of very attractive women, 7 and ups, you know, depending on what city they in, what profession they in, where they hang out at. And then for some other guys, they might be 4 and belows and stuff. You gotta pay attention to that. You gotta pay attention to every little thing about the women. And this is very important. Your environment is very important because, okay, I'll use myself for an example, right? Right now I live in outside of Baltimore, about 30 minutes away from Baltimore, right? It's a very big difference in dealing with the women there as opposed to dealing with the women in the DC area. You know, you have a lot of 87s in the Baltimore area, and that's kind of good. You can go straight for them. They're looking for stability and all of that stuff, but they're more blue collar. And yeah, they got some professionals up here, of course, but you in this general area, is dominated more by blue collar type of women, down to earth women that you can just say, hey, you know, you gotta approach them straight. But if I'm in the DC area, the environment is more 92s, more professional type of women, more women who have degrees. They got their dual degrees. So there's more of them. Of course, yeah, and they got other women down there, of course, but you gotta think, if you're dealing with a bunch of women who are on a higher level, then you gotta deal with some other stuff. It's different. You can't, like, anybody who think you can just approach all women the same, they haven't dealt with all women. Anybody who says that, you cannot. You gotta figure, okay, what's their class level? What religion are they? You gotta look at all that stuff, even racial, everything. You know, you got some areas of the country where you're going to have a bunch of women who, quite frankly, going to be overweight. A lot of guys don't want to deal with that. I've talked to some guys who are from the South. They say, yeah, they all overweight down here, deep South. But then you get some other areas, like the area I live in, the specific area, it's nothing to see women at the gym or working out hard and everything. You know, even pushing baby carriages while they running. But that's not going to be in all areas. See, you got to know what environment. You got to know your hunting grounds. How about that? Why don't we say it like that? You got to know your hunting grounds. You can't think, oh, and you got to immediately know, okay, I got to approach women here like this, but then you got to approach women in this other area. Now, one of the things you have to know is not so much the women in your environment, that's important, but you got to know how they're going to respond to you. That's why I would tell a lot of guys, if you're having trouble with the women in your environment, you might have to move. A lot of guys need to move, and a lot of guys have done that. And, you know, not necessarily moving for the women, but, you know, a job might take them to another area. They're like, damn, these women are real friendly here. They ain't like the women in my other area, you know? But that's your environment. That's your social environment. Like, you get some guys talking about Pookie and Ray Ray. If you in the area and you dealing with women going for low class, low level men, that's not the area for you. You need to leave. If that's what you're competing with, you know? Like I mentioned Baltimore and DC. Yeah, if you're in the DC area, you're competing with professional men. I remember a woman even said that one time. She said, yeah, and she's from Baltimore. She said, you know, the guys up here, you know, they ain't as suave as the guys who are in the DC area. You know, it's different stuff because then you got to switch your shit up depending on where you at. Like if I were to move to any area, I'll be nice and quiet. And shoot, I've even seen that just moving like from where I was from an apartment to where I'm at now. I saw a big difference. I was like, oh, okay. Because one of the things is they're gonna look at men differently depending on the economic class. A woman who's in a blue collar area working, or she's working at like some fast food joint, she's gonna look at men a whole lot different from a woman who's working at a major law firm. There's gonna be a difference. You gotta look at that. They're gonna have different needs, different wants, everything. Like you might deal with that woman who work at that law firm, but first of all, she gonna be like, well, where did you go to school? What's your degree in? Because that's a problem with a lot of those more professional type of women, regardless of race. A lot of times they can find a guy, but they looking for a guy who got those degrees too. Remember, in general, women look up. In general. So if they got something, they prefer a man who got more. If they make it 150,000, in general, their preference is men who making 200,000. In general. I'm saying in general because there's always instances where that's not the case. But you got to go with, okay, what the majority are doing. You don't want to try to wait for that lucky exception to a situation. You could be waiting a long time. But in general, you got to look at all the women in the area. And also what type of clubs you go to, you got to look at a lot of stuff, but it's the overall environment. You got to know. As soon as you go around, you got to know what they like, what they going for, what type of men they walking around with in general. You got to know the places there. And like I said, it might not be your environment. A lot of guys really, quite frankly, just need to change where they live. They need to change it. They need to change where they're going, what they're doing, type of home they living in. Because trust me, it's a big difference between some place that's got a lot of, that's hood, trailer park, poor area, than a rich area. Anybody who's been in both can tell you there's overall differences, but if you're talking about getting a woman, man gets woman, it depends on where you're at. But that's the first thing. You got to know what environment that you're living in. That's the first thing before anything else. All right? Before anything else. So know the women in your environment, know what they about, know what they looking for, know who they are. Then that'll tell you who they'll look for. That'll tell you who they look for. And it might or might not be you, but you got to know that before you go hunting. You got to know. You might be somebody, I'm going to talk about body game. You might be somebody want to hit the gym, but you're in an area you can't find the gym. I've noticed that. You get some areas with some money, you got gyms on top of gyms. You got some area that don't have money, you be hard pressed. There's a difference. You in an area where you get women running all the time and try to stay in shape. And only time in other areas, poor areas, only time you see them running is when they running to get that bus to get to work. So that you might not see them run then. They might be they don't want to mess up their hair or makeup. They might be like, no, I'll get the next one. So anyway, that's all I have for right now. I'll get back with y'all. Peace and blessings.